A new documentary says social media companies like Google and Facebook
have tremendous power that they shouldn't have.
Google's power comes from what they put at the top of our search results.
Users are habituated to assume the stuff at the top is the best, but instead it's just what Google wants them to see.
Search best dog food, Google filters the results.
The filtering is biased because why did it pick those websites instead of the other 14 billion? So the problem comes in, obviously, when we're not talking about dog foods, but when we're talking about things like elections.
I am running for president of the United States.
Google senior management was heavily in favor of Hillary Clinton. Their ability to manipulate the algorithm is something that they've demonstrated that they've done in the past. And the evidence from academics who monitored 2016 is clearly that they did.
Peter Schweitzer wrote the documentary. He says Google wants to steer America left.
They view their purpose as a company is to change the values of the United States.
Some researchers claim to find evidence that positive stories about Hillary Clinton ranked higher in Google search. But that doesn't prove that Google manipulated that. It might have happened because the media lean left, and Google search algorithms rely in part on popularity of websites. Algorithms that all social media companies notice what we like and give us more of that. They reinforce what we already think. It's called
confirmation bias. We pay attention to and actually believe things if they support what we already believe. So if you see a fake news story that says Hillary Clinton is the devil, but you love Hillary Clinton, you're not going to buy it. You're going to say that's ridiculous. On the other hand, if you happen to think Hillary Clinton is the devil, you're going to go, yes, I knew that.
Our opinions confirmed by unbiased algorithms. But
they're not using unbiased algorithms to do things like search for unacceptable content on Twitter and on YouTube and on Facebook. Those aren't unbiased at all. They're built specifically to filter out whatever's bad.
There is certain content that clearly we do not allow, right? Hate speech, terrorist content, nudity, anything that makes people feel unsafe.
Some of that censoring is done by human employees, some of whom despise conservatives.
According to a former Facebook employee, the social media mega company sometimes ignores what is actually trending among its billion users if the story originated from a conservative news source.
I made a couple of videos at home.
Google censors briefly shut down Jordan Peterson's Gmail and blocked his YouTube channel.
That's a real problem. You come to rely on these things, and when the plug is pulled suddenly, then that puts a big hole in your life.
Psychologist Robert Epstein says he was censored after the Washington Post reported that he was researching whether Google could tilt an election.
The next day, I could no longer access Google.com.
People essentially disappear because Google has decided they don't want you to hear what they have to say.
We asked Google and Facebook to reply to the documentary's accusations. They didn't respond.
Handful of people working at a handful of technology companies, through their choices, will steer what a billion people are thinking today.
So what if we want to break up with Google? It's not easy. Google knows where we are, even when we're not using our phones.
We have Google, which basically maybe knows what I'm going to ask for before I ask for it. It finishes my search request. It knows everything that's going on in my household. Should I be concerned about how much you know about me?
We've had this question for more than a decade at Google, and our answer is always the same. You have control over the information that we have about you. You can actually have it deleted. You can also search anonymously. You get to choose not to give us this information.
But it turns out you really can't.
And even when they tell you that they're not collecting information on you, they actually are. Even if you say that you don't want to be tracked, they continue to track you anyway.
So what can we do about it? Schweitzer ends his documentary with this thought.
If the companies won't change, delete your accounts, okay?
But I don't want to delete my accounts. And you can't without cutting yourself off from much of the best of the world.
Yeah, this is the challenge.
Schweitzer won't use Google search.
I use DuckDuckGo or other tools because I want Google to know as little as possible about me.
That's all we have, a little pathetic act that won't make any difference.
Well, no, I think it does. And I think also you can move away from Gmail. I use a Proton Mail out of Switzerland. And if people make clear to Google that they don't like their manipulation, they don't like their invasion of privacy, they will be forced to make changes. That's part of the reason that we love and support the market the way we do.
A lawsuit against Harvard.
The outcome could affect the future of affirmative action.
Harvard has been sued for illegally discriminating against Asian Americans. The legal action forced the school to make its admissions data public for the first time. That did reveal that Asian applicants must score 22 points higher on the SAT than whites, 63 points higher than blacks. Nevertheless,
Harvard denies it discriminates against Asian Americans or any other group.
Harvard says race is just one factor among many.
That is just a lie.
Li Cheng supports the students suing the school.
Harvard didn't just use race as one of many factors, it was the determinative factor.
Harvard says many Americans of Asian descent don't get in because they score lower in personal attributes.
Harvard rated Asian Americans on personality, right, on subjective factors like likability and courage lower. This is because Asian Americans are boring little grade grubbers. They just focus on getting good grades and good test scores. I can categorically say that's bullshit.
If you only look at grades and test scores, it looks like a lot of discrimination against Asians.
Economist Harry Holzer, who went to Harvard, defends the school. Asians are not interesting? They don't have interesting qualities?
But the personal ratings reflect a wide range of characteristics. Now, it's possible that some of that is anti-Asian bias, but you certainly can't prove that.
Oh, I don't think they're discriminating against Asians, but I assume they're discriminating for blacks and Latinos because there's been a history of discrimination.
I wouldn't label it discrimination. I would label it as leveling the playing field. I mean,
isn't that discrimination?
No, it's race-conscious assistance, and when you have a long history of discrimination based on race, you have to take race into account.
Hasn't Harvard, like lots of other schools, been deceitful about what they're doing? They basically lied for years.
I don't know if they were putting their own spin.
This case is expected to get to the Supreme Court, and the new court may ban racial preferences. If that happens,
you'll see a large increase in the white student population, and you see a precipitous decline in the black and Latino student population, about 50%.
50% decline in those of color.
Harvard would be a less interesting place if that happens.
There are many, many different ways to achieve diversity without discriminating against Asian Americans. The reality is that race-focused affirmative action helps rich people. 70% of the students of every ethnic group at Harvard come from the top 20% of family income.
I think it's okay that some of the minorities admitted under affirmative action come from higher income families. Race in America matters at any level of income.
The groups that are harmed the most are actually poor whites and poor Asians.
Chang is passionate about ending racial preferences because when he was in the 8th grade, he applied to San Francisco's Lowell High School.
I was just shocked when I found out I had to score higher than kids of any other ethnic group because I'd just taken civics. I was just taught in civics and history that in America, everybody was supposed to be equal under the law.
Lowell High School excels in everything from music to math.
Chang got into that high school, but
the kids who were negatively affected were the kids of the dishwashers and the seamstresses who lived in Chinatown, who were very poor.
Chang later went to Harvard. He became a lawyer and successfully sued San Francisco over its race-based preferences.
So we got rid of the quotas in San Francisco.
You Asians, we white people, we're doing well in America. We don't need extra help, but some other groups do, and there's a history of nasty discrimination against them. Isn't it Harvard's job to try to make up for some of that?
The right path, out of the history of discrimination against individuals based on race is not more discrimination based on race. I have 3 kids, and I'll be damned if I'm going to not fight very, very hard to make sure that they don't get treated as second-class citizens in the land in which they were born.
You've probably heard that America has the most mass shootings in the world. That's often given as a reason for more gun control. But economist John Lott looked into that claim, and he says it's a myth based on one bogus study.
The United States has the most mass shootings.
By far, the most public mass shootings.
You don't see murder on this kind of scale with this kind of frequency in any other advanced nation on earth.
Where'd that claim come from? Obama and everyone else base it on
a study done by University of Alabama professor Adam Lankford.
University of Alabama professor Adam Lankford.
This is Adam Lankford.
I studied 171 countries for more than 40 years, 1966 to 2012. And essentially the answer was, not surprisingly, the United States has by far the most public mass shooters.
His claim received coverage in hundreds of news stories, but all these people were misled by Lankford. Lankford's study claimed that since 1966, there were 90 mass public shooters in the United States, more than any other country. Lankford counted 202 shooters in the rest of the world. Lankford claimed complete data were available for 171 countries. But how did Lankford find every shooting in all these countries, most of which don't speak English? And how did he find all the cases in the years before the internet? Few governments collect this data. Finding complete data for mass public shootings in just one developing country, say India in the 1970s, would be an incredible feat. Many of these shootings would have been reported only in local outlets, in the local language.
That shooting at the Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut.
On the other hand, United States mass public shootings are well documented and hard to miss. If Lankford undercounted foreign cases because he missed finding old newspapers or had trouble with language barriers, his paper's entire conclusion that the United States had the most mass public shootings would fall apart. Many journalists and researchers asked Lankford for his data. Not only did he refuse to share a list of his cases, or even the number of shootings he found in each country, which are nowhere in his paper, he even refused to share an explanation for how he found those cases. That's academic malpractice. Asked if he used foreign languages to search for these shootings, Lankford stated, "My data were not limited to English language searches." Asked what languages he used, Lankford refused to provide that information. "This is all the assistance I can provide at this time," Lankford said. Look, I've researched crime for decades, and I've published dozens of peer-reviewed academic articles on the subject. Lankford won't even respond to my emails with simple questions. Now, maybe he doesn't want to talk to me because I'm well known for my research, more guns, less crime. But Lankford has refused to share his list of shooters and methods, even with strong gun control advocates. This all seemed very suspicious to me. So the think tank that I run, the Crime Prevention Research Center, researched it. Unlike Lankford, we took a lot of time to find all the foreign cases we could. We even got translators to identify cases. Using the same definition of mass public shooters Lankford used, 4 more people killed in a public place, not part of some other type of crime, we found that he grossly undercounted foreign attacks. We counted well over 3,000 shooters, at least 15 times more shooters as Lankford claimed.
31% of total shooters, despite the fact that we only have 5% of the world's population.
Of the 86 countries where we have identified any mass public shootings occurring, the United States ranks 62nd. Norway, Finland, Switzerland, and Russia are European countries with significantly higher rates of murders from mass public shootings.
The explanation is firearm ownership rate.
When Langford's data are fixed, there is no relationship between gun ownership rates and mass public shooters. There's a lesson here. Langford's critical but simple error could have been picked up if journalists had only demanded his data and methods before publicizing his study. Journalists should learn to be skeptical. In the meantime, we should all be skeptical of news coverage of studies like this that simply confirm what journalists and people want to hear.
Before releasing this video, I also asked Langford for his data and methods for finding shootings in foreign language media. Langford would not provide the information. It's that time of year. We're buying gifts. So what should I give a person who might want to learn about liberty? How about a book? Here are 6 that expanded my brain. First, Road to Serfdom. In this book, Friedrich Hayek explains why government intervention in the economy leads to serfdom. For writing that, Hayek was trashed.
Dismissed, ridiculed, and ignored. Yet, in the end, even defenders of socialism came to concede that he was right.
Government doesn't need to intervene, wrote Hayek, because a free market, like a school of fish or a flock of birds, creates a spontaneous order. No central planner can allocate resources as well as the individual birds or people.
The economy's us.
Recently, an economist made this rap video about Hayek's ideas.
We don't need a mechanic. Put away the wrenches. The economy's organic.
But now socialism's popular again, and celebrities say things like this.
We have to say yes to socialism, to the word and everything.
So A Road to Serfdom is a great book to give to your socialist friends, if only they'd read this. Still, its old-fashioned language can be tough going. Here's a gift that explains economics in modern language. In his many books, Thomas Sowell makes economics simpler.
No charts, no equations, all words, plain English.
That's right, no graphs.
No graphs.
In Basic Economics, he explains things like why President Trump is wrong about trade.
How much should people really worry about the balance of trade?
Somewhat less than you worry about being struck by lightning.
Maybe someone will give this to the president? An even simpler book that tells the story of how a clueless lefty reporter finally woke up to the benefits of free markets is this book. But it would be self-serving of me to promote Give Me a Break, so I won't mention it. Atlas Shrugged is another great introduction to creeping government intervention. In this novel, Ayn Rand predicted today's America, predicted high society parties where rich people would vilify profits and other things that made them rich.
Our ideals are higher than profit.
Rand saw, long before I did, how that kind of ignorance and the size of government would increase, despite her character's efforts to fight it.
If you believe you may seize my property simply because you need it, well, then so does any burglar.
Government's the burglar, said Rand. And this book, The Myth of the Robber Barons, takes the point further. It explains why capitalists like John D. Rockefeller, people who were called robber barons, were in fact not robbers or barons. They were not born rich, and they didn't get rich by robbing people. They got rich by creating better things.
Rockefeller's affordable kerosene, processed crude oil, made the world brighter, warmer, cleaner.
Likewise, Cornelius Vanderbilt got rich not by robbing, but by making travel faster and cheaper.
Vanderbilt cut the costs of travel, filled his ships with eager passengers.
It was Vanderbilt's competitors who called him a robber baron, and the ignorant media picked that up. The competitors who hated Vanderbilt didn't feel much need to improve because they were backed by politicians. When they failed, there was always another politician to appeal to.
Vanderbilt, in contrast, had to serve his customers or he would have lost his company.
Exactly, because the so-called robber barons had their own money at stake, so they spent it carefully. 2 more books left. Consider Animal Farm. Novelist George Orwell describes farm animals who revolt against their human master, only to be ruled by new tyrants, the pigs.
I'll make your decisions.
In Orwell's book,
All animals are equal.
with the exception of the pigs.
Finally, another great introduction to freedom is this book, Free to Choose. Milton and Rose Friedman explain in plain English here how limiting government creates prosperity.
The free market enables people to go into any industry they want.
The Nobel Prize-winning economist once said, put the federal government in charge of the Sahara Desert, in 5 years there'd be a shortage of sand.
We somehow or other have to find a way to prevent government from continuing to grow and continuing to take over more and more control over our lives.
Well, we failed at that. But here at Stossel TV, we won't quit trying. And these books will help. Happy holidays. Is Google doing creepy things to us? A new documentary says yes.
Google crosses the creepy line every day.
Before I explain the creepy line, let's review how we got here.
Allison, can you explain what internet is?
Just a few decades ago, a time when people my age didn't understand computers.
Mark Zuckerberg, who was a student at Harvard, decided he wanted to create a social media platform basically to meet girls and to make friends.
We were college students, right? And we were just building stuff because we thought it was cool.
Larry Page and Sergey Brin decide they wanted to create the ultimate search engine for the internet.
They had a better index than other indexes that were around. Theirs was not the first search engine.
And it was just leaps and bounds ahead of services like Yahoo, Alta Vista, and quickly became the clear winner in the space just from a technology basis.
Google put answers to your question on one page and ranked them.
Spiders around the internet, taking pictures of web pages and analyzing the links between the web pages and using that to make some assumptions about relevance.
Now, they had to figure out, how do we make money off this? All you do is track people's searches. Your search history is very, very informative. That's going to tell someone immediately whether you're Republican or Democrat, whether you like one breakfast cereal versus another.
Then they could sell you to advertisers.
So they could hook up the umbrella makers with people searching for umbrellas, basically send you targeted ads. That is where Google gets more than 90% of its revenue. They don't sell you anything. They sell you.
Fine. Because they know about me, I get ads on my screen that might actually appeal to me. So what's the problem? Well, the filmmaker says this is the problem.
They are constructing a profile of you. And that profile is real, it's detailed, it's granular, and it never goes away.
And what I didn't know until I watched The Creepy Line is how far Google goes to follow us on the web.
They were getting a lot of information from people using the search engine, but if people went directly to a website, that's bad, because now Google doesn't know that. So they developed a browser, which is now the most widely used browser in the world, Chrome. By getting people to use Chrome, they were able now to collect information about every single website you visited, whether or not you were using their search engine. But of course, even that's not enough, right?
Then Google wanted to know, what do people do when they're not online?
As soon as you connect to the internet, Android uploads to Google a complete history of where you've been that day.
So what? They're giving me information.
They are giving you information, but to the extent that somebody can do something for you, they can do something to you.
Peter Schweitzer wrote The Creepy Line. I love these services.
Well, you're seeing all the positive, good side of it. What you're not
Your
seeing...
movie's all about the bad side. That's why people hate the media.
The question comes down to, are they abusing their power? And I think you can make a very important, powerful, compelling case that they are.
His documentary suggests regulation.
Media companies are regulated, newspapers are regulated, telecommunications providers are regulated.
But regulation often makes things worse for consumers. And politicians are too clueless to do it well. Watch Senator Hatch embarrass himself.
Well, how do you sustain a business model in which users don't pay for your service?
Senator, we run ads.
You want regulation? That's going to make it better?
I think one of the ways you deal with Google's market concentration and its massive control of search is put it under the same shackles that other media companies do.
Shackles aren't good. I mean, government has the guns. Government can always step in at some point if the people find Google just doing evil.
Yeah.
But to start it now,
I would rather say, here are the ground rules that other media companies have to subscribe to. Google should be put in the same category.
Now, I don't presume to know what, if anything, ought to be done to make sure Facebook and Google don't harm the world. But the documentary does make a compelling case that these giant companies do creepy things.
There's what I call the creepy line, and the Google policy about a lot of these things is to get right up to the creepy line but not cross it.
It's an interesting word, creepy, right? Because it's a word that connotes horror. I don't think the typical ethical person says, I'm going to push right up to the line of creepy and stop there. Because creepy is really bad. A creepy mugger is worse than a mugger. The mugger wants your money. God only knows what the creepy mugger wants. It's more than your money.
In my second and concluding video on the creepy line, we look at how a few people in Silicon Valley secretly shape what we think and maybe who will govern us.
I am running for President of the United States.
Last election, Silicon Valley tried but failed to elect Hillary. But next election, the creepy line says,
if the major players in tech right now, and that's mainly Google and Facebook, banded together and got behind the same candidate, they could shift 10% of the vote in the United States with no one knowing that they had done anything.
Socialism is responsible for 100 million deaths, more people than fascism.
A single rocket hitting the center of the city killed 11 people.
It also increases poverty. So why does it appeal to so many people?
Democratic socialism is about...
Young politicians say socialism will help the poor.
That in a modern, moral, and wealthy society, no person in America should be too poor to live. That's what I think.
That seems simple.
Seems pretty simple.
Don't they know that socialism creates more poverty?
The oil-rich country is now leading Latin America in what is called acute malnutrition.
Even people who understand that socialism is bad for the economy may not know that socialism almost always leads to violence.
120 people were killed during 2017.
Why does socialism lead to violence? Socialism gives absolute power to the state. No one is allowed to own private property or trade. Yet everywhere under socialism, people still do.
Marianne is able to find a listing for diapers. The black market online price is almost $10 cheaper.
People have to trade in the black market to survive, but then government gets violent. They throw some of them in jail.
My father was a political prisoner for almost a decade because he's in his 20s, sold soaps and perfumes, and did not want to relinquish all his profits to the government.
Capitalism sucks. Fuck capitalism.
Today in America, capitalism is vilified. But if capitalism is so bad,
why hasn't there been a mass exodus out of America because of capitalism? I'm sorry, you just don't see it.
Socialism is like the perfect excuse for someone who wants to rule an authoritarian regime.
As people rebel against government controls, the politicians, to preserve their power, use violence to stop them.
And they threw me on the floor and they started kicking me.
They tortured him, asking who organized the protests. How did you answer?
I said the people are just tired of Daniel Ortega.
Ortega has governed Nicaragua for 22 of the last 39 years.
In Nicaragua, people have again fallen for Daniel Ortega and his socialist promises.
El lastre del capitalismo. ¿Cuál es la alternativa?
But under his policies, Nicaragua has gone from one of Central America's safest countries to one of the most dangerous. In Venezuela, where there are similar protests, this man was a mayor in Caracas.
The Minister of Interior Affairs was calling me several times a week, asking me to use the police department that I was in charge of to go against protests in Chacao.
The mayor refused to have his police punish the protesters, so he was threatened with jail. He then escaped to America. Why do you think Venezuela followed the same path when we had Cuba's example for decades and it was terrible?
Yeah, well, it seems to me we're not able to learn. They will always be dreaming about the future and never delivering. And people keep falling in love with that kind of crap.
They do. Socialism repeatedly leads to violence, and yet, around the world, people praise it.
I don't think they realize how deep socialism is involved in all that.
This man fled Nicaragua. He understands.
America is a great country, and people really don't appreciate it much. They should travel a little more to poor countries to really get a feeling for what they have here in the United States. Look around, just look around, you know, and really get some knowledge.
These things are causing the new health crisis. So says our government and the media.
E-cigarettes are popping up everywhere.
They've got serious potential harms.
Vaporizers or e-cigarettes let people get a hit of nicotine without actually burning tobacco. So the government scares people about it.
The FDA warning about liquid nicotine.
Scientists say it can change your brain.
But vaping is a much less harmful way to consume nicotine.
Extraordinarily less harmful. I mean, it's about 95% less harmful than a normal traditional cigarette.
Michelle Minton of the Competitive Enterprise Institute studies vices like vaping. She concludes,
we should really be encouraging people to use vaping, and there's only a couple ways.
Encouraging people?
Absolutely, because there's no controversy at this point, the fact that vaping is much less harmful than smoking.
Actually, there is some controversy.
E-cigarette battery suddenly exploded.
Some vaporizers are defective, but most important, vapor contains harmful chemicals too. Nevertheless,
vaping is far less harmful than smoking.
It's nicotine that makes both e-cigarettes and regular cigarettes addictive. But nicotine itself isn't that bad. It's a stimulant.
And similar to caffeine.
Similar to caffeine?
On the spectrum of drugs that you can become addicted to, nicotine and caffeine are very similar to each other.
Enjoy a cigarette.
But tobacco smoke contains 7,000 other chemicals, some of which cause cancer. Taking in nicotine is not as harmful as inhaling smoke from the burning of paper and tobacco leaves.
What's harmful about nicotine is how it is delivered. Delivered through cigarettes, it's incredibly harmful, incredibly deadly.
By contrast, while e-cigarettes may deliver these big puffs of smoke, the smoke is mostly flavored vapor, less likely to harm anyone. Also, it doesn't smell as bad as cigarettes.
Somebody who's vaping a huge cloud of vanilla, cherry blast, whatever they're vaping, is way more pleasant than standing next to somebody who is exhaling smoke from a combustible cigarette.
So these are less intrusive and safer. So what does our government do?
There's an epidemic spreading.
It launches campaigns against vaping.
Your kids are not an experiment. Protect them from e-cigarettes.
Actually, kids have been vaping a little less since 2014, according to data from the CDC. But recently there was a spike.
The only explanation I can come up with now is that the CDC and the FDA has been doing the most advertising of these products by talking about them so much.
Young people should never use these kinds of products.
Telling children you shouldn't be doing this thing is not necessarily going to make many of them say no, maybe makes it more attractive to them.
Kids are going to the bathroom, smoking it in stalls. Next thing you know, you're hooked like that.
My former employer, ABC News, is eager to talk about the dangers.
Addicted to nicotine before they even graduate from middle school.
Recently, they ran more than a dozen scare stories about vaping.
Another recent study suggests that e-cigarettes are a gateway to traditional cigarettes.
Gateway to traditional cigarettes.
If someone is going to use cigarettes, they're probably going to start with an e-cigarette first.
However,
some children who might have gone on to use actual cigarettes might just stop with e-cigarettes.
If I take a puff of this, I get, oh, that smells good. What is that? What flavor is that? If I smoke a cigarette, I get funny looks and, brush shoulders.
Do we want children to become addicted to anything? No. No one's going to say they want kids to become addicted. But keeping a small percent of teenagers from trying e-cigarettes is not worth sacrificing adults whose lives could be saved.
Why not ban all these things? They're all bad for you.
And that would be a tragedy for public health. A really good example of this is what happened in Europe with something called snus.
Sweden was built on premium quality snus.
Snus is a moist tobacco chew that has been banned in the EU for about 2 or 3 decades now, except for in one country, Sweden. And Sweden currently has the lowest smoking rates and the lowest lung cancer rates of any EU country.
The EU's banning the tobacco alternative didn't work out very well.
If we do this with e-cigarettes, it would be as bad as what the EU did with snus. We've seen this with vaping already.
Cities across the country are starting to ban e-cigarette use in public.
The states that have enacted, over 21 to buy e-cigarettes or over 18, the teenage smoking rates go up again. Because when teens who want to do something like smoking can't get a hold of e-cigarettes, they just go to smoking.
It can release dangerous chemicals like formaldehyde into your bloodstream.
Children aren't the only people seeing these ads. 5 years ago, very few adults believed that e-cigarettes were as harmful as smoking. And now, thanks in large part to these government warnings, adult smokers think that vaping is as harmful or even more harmful.
How many adult
than smoking.
smokers think that?
We're talking on the order of 60% at this point. So it used to be
It's just wrong.
30, and it's dead wrong. There are a few lunatics out there who say that e-cigarettes are more harmful based on zero evidence, but every legitimate, rational scientist who's investigated this issue has said, we don't know all the risks, but we can say that they're less harmful than smoking.
Now, Minton's think tank has received some money from companies that make e-cigarettes. But best I can tell, her science is right. Vaping is a safer alternative. You may think it's unusual that Minton spends all her working time studying and writing about vices. What's wrong with you? Alcohol, gambling, vaping. 11 years studying this stuff. Why?
I like some of those bad things personally, and it's also personal for me because we're talking about the essence of what it is to be a free human being, which is to make decisions about risk in your life. There's nothing more fundamental to human choice than being able to decide for yourself what kind of risks you want to take with your body, with your money, with your life. So it's a fundamental freedom for myself that I want to protect, not just for other people, but also for them.